IBEW. He's a low voltage electrician. Yeah. Exactly.
It was a Marvel comic arts kind of. It was just like it was Abrams combination with Marvel, like what all the stuff that they're doing. And mine was one of them, and everything else was, you know, like very arty. And well, Dan Santat was there. I don't know if you know him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
That was a great book he wrote. Dang.
All the Holt feels. He wrote a book.
Oh, he also did.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of his A First Time for Everything. Or
Oh,
his first
yeah.
second book.
Yeah.
That one hit. That
Yeah.
was so good.
No, that was really good.
He's done a lot of books.
Yeah, he's done a lot of books, but he just did this new Hulk one, which the premise is great. It's the idea is that the one that feels the emotions really is Banner, because he's the one that gets angry and switches to the Hulk, and then so like you get angry at these stupid things, and then the Hulk will show up and be like, why am I here? So like you're mad because you got a turkey sandwich instead of a chicken, and then so the book is the Hulk writing a letter to Banner about
Being
like,
like-
hey, look, you need to chill.
Yeah.
You know?
Holt does that in my book.
Oh, does he? That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
It's Bruce Banner who needs therapy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. The Hulk doesn't.
The Hulk just shows up.
Yeah, he's just there.
I haven't read it. So
That's funny.
Yeah. So it's so it goes.
My next book is with Iron Man and Hulk, and luckily I didn't. I pretty much ignore Banner the whole thing.
Didn't have time to get my nails done before this, so.
Oh, they're cute.
Thanks.
Mine are been climbing on these. So
Oh,
maybe
that's
flip
what's up.
them, and they're not cute. It's just like
No, but they're functional. I dig it.
they are functional.
Where do you, so is it the sort of climbing where you're like going straight up?
Yeah,
Go upside
bouldering.
down ones?
These are 17. They're good. So I keep
I don't know why I'm even saying those.
It is. Yeah. What are those? Yeah.
Is it good? Do you feel like they're complementary exercises? It's good.
I feel like there's like a. Totally. We'll riff.
Yeah, we can riff.
Yeah. We'll play jazz. We'll riff. Yeah, I feel like nerds love climbing. Like it's like a little video game.
Yes.
Oh, okay, it's time.
Right. And it's got an answer, but there's many ways to get there.
Yeah.
Are we good? Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming here today. I wanted to thank the San Diego Central Library, the Children's Book Council, and Comic-Con for everybody helping put this program on today. I also would like to read a message from the Children's Book Council. The Children's Book Council is a nonprofit trade association representing 140 publishers of children's, middle grade, and young adult books in North America. The CBC coordinates a variety of book awards, curates free reading lists and educational resources for teachers, librarians, booksellers, and families, fights against book bans, and partners with national organizations to foster a lifelong love of reading. The CBC's Graphic Novel Committee advocates for graphic novels, manga, manhwa, and related formats as powerful tools for literacy. Whether used in classrooms or enjoyed at home, the committee works to ensure these visual storytelling formats are recognized and respected as meaningful literary works. It also remains dedicated to uplifting and celebrating the voices of BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ authors and illustrators. And now let's get to it. So the first thing I think we should do is introduce ourselves, and because the people on the panel today are so prolific and have done so many different types of things in their lives, I'm gonna let them give brief introductions of themselves. For myself, I'm Brenda Maier. I'm a gifted education specialist from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I am also a mom of 5 people, ages teenage to young adult, and I write picture books, and I have a graphic novel series for young readers.
And my name is Dean Hale. I am a co-author of dozens of books with my wife. The most known is probably the Princess in Black series. And I am the sole author of 2 books, one of which is right here on this table so far. And I'm excited to be here.
I'm Jeffrey Brown. I'm probably best known for my Star Wars books like Darth Vader and Son, but more recently I've been doing some work with Marvel. So I have a book called Hulk Teach coming out in the fall, and an X-Men book called X-Men Days of Future Fun, where the X-Men are kids and just getting into trouble with their powers, and that's already out.
I'm Kennedy Tarrell, and I have a background in animation, but this is my debut graphic novel for young adult readers, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm a cartoonist. I'm Shyne, and my day job is being a Snoopy staff artist. And then by night, I write graphic novels like this one, You and Me on Repeat, which is my debut.
And now we're going to I'm going to ask everyone to give just a quick pitch of their books that we're here talking about today. Mine is a graphic novel series called The Adventures of Penguin and Panda. It's about 2 polar opposite besties, feel all the feels, very neurotic penguin who may or may not bear a lot of resemblance to myself, and a very chill panda and the adventures that they go on. And it was recently named to the ALA Best Graphic Novels for Young Readers for Kids 5 to 9.
My book is called Iron Man Something Strange, and it is about, as you'd expect, Iron Man, and probably also, as you'd expect, Doctor Strange. It's a series, it's the beginning, well, there's a Mighty Marvel Team-Up series that Abrams publishes, and there was one with Spider-Man that Mike Mayhack did, and so this is the second wave of team-ups of Iron Man with other luminaries of the Marvel Universe. And in this book, Iron Man is confronted with something he does not understand, which is very frustrating for someone who considers himself a genius and has to try to figure out how to work with something and someone else he doesn't understand.
Yeah, so X-Men Days of Future Fun. I have 2 kids, and it's kind of channeling situations of the mischief that they got into, or that me and my brothers got into growing up, but just getting to draw X-Men, which was my favorite comic growing up. So yeah, it was a lot of fun just visually, just drawing the X-Men was like childhood dream come true.
Evilish is largely about a disillusioned teenager who is really into evil vibes, but when they join a villainous league, realize that evil is more than just an aesthetic, and it's also an ode to high school cringe years.
You and Me on Repeat is about 2 high school seniors who are caught in a time loop on their graduation day. Will romance happen? You gotta find out.
Just laughing because I would not want to repeat that day over and over.
No way.
Okay, so we all know that graphic novels have many benefits, but as a teacher, I still run into parents who don't see their educational value. But yet, when I go pick up my students from the classroom, if it's reading time, virtually everyone is reading graphic novels. And I work at a majority Hispanic school, and a lot of the kids are still learning English. And the marriage of that text and those panels seem to give them a second layer of reading support. And it also helps give them more context to figure out higher level vocabulary. And also, we can't keep them on the shelves in the library. So let's talk about the value of them. And if I don't specifically ask it, and you think of something else that is a value of cartoons, graphic novels, just throw it in there. So Dean, empathy, or considering how others feel, is something that all people need to know. You and your wife are parents of 4, so I'm sure you're masters of modeling empathy. How do you feel your books build empathy in readers?
Well, I think that, really the trick with empathy is to present. I think it was, I can't remember who said it first, but I remember Gene Yang saying that the more specific a story is, the more universal it becomes. And what I think he meant by that is he was talking about telling his specific stories and how it seemed to resonate with so many people who actually did not have that specific experience. And so I think if we're able to, when we, my wife and I'm thinking of primarily, or just writers in general, able to include characters that are not, watered down, that they are specific people and that they represent people that may be different from the people who are reading the book. I think it gives kids and everybody really an opportunity to connect and empathize with someone who has a lived experience that is different from theirs. And so they're sort of able to vicariously experience that life. And then, when you meet someone who is different than you in real life, you're like, oh, well, I've already had this experience and I can relate to this person rather than, automatically branding them other.
And that is so important right now,
Oh, yeah,
especially
yeah.
right now. Okay, Jeffrey, if a kid puts a book down, I'm thinking as a parent and as a teacher, we can't get them to do any more thinking about characterization or plot or anything. And one way to keep kids engaged with reading is humor. And you've won 2 Eisner Awards for humor. So where do you draw from to create the humor in your cartoons or comics?
Yeah, I mean, so like there are times in my life where I've thought to be like a serious artist creating meaningful work, like you couldn't have humor. And I think also coming from art school, it was kind of like humor is kind of looked down upon sometimes. But whenever I start working on something, like what feels most comfortable and right is humor. When you're dealing with serious situations, humor is a way not just to process it, but a way to like come to acceptance of some of the harder things in life. And I think for kids, there's ways where something that's really funny, like, will bring them back. And at some point they start deconstructing, like, well, why is that funny? And so one of the things I like to do is draw on my own life and like the most awkward, embarrassing situations. And I find that like kids are really drawn to those stories where they're seeing, like, they can see themselves and they can see, like, I'm not the only one that, wet my pants. Or whatever, and I think so. I think humor is kind of like almost like a shield that like builds armor for yourself.
What you're saying makes me think about how, as teachers, we teach kids that there are 3 purposes for writing: to persuade, inform, or entertain. And I think some people mistake the fact that if it's really entertaining, maybe it can't also be informative or have any educational value. Kennedy, we strive to make readers connect with our characters on an emotional level. Although your main character, Hawthorne, wants to join the evil Brigade of Shade, which I found them delightful, and that should probably cause some self-reflection. But I wonder what you hoped about Hawthorne would hook readers emotionally, considering their nefarious intent in the story.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
What about him?
Yeah, I think that they're actually, Dean, to your point, there's something about specificity with a character that really makes an audience connect. And I also think that there's something a little universal in being interested in the taboo. I think that, at least for me, I could speak to like villains get to say all the jokes to camera and they get to wear the cool capes. And I think that that is also developmentally like just true of growing up and finding independence as an adult. And so making mistakes, trying to find your group are all universal qualities, but I really tried to add a specific, like a very specific vibe to it, because I think that helps people find an inroad.
Yeah, it was just delightful. I loved it. Mary, I mentioned that some people are still skeptical about the value of comics compared to prose narratives, and you've expressed the strengths and importance of both. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think they're both mediums, and they're different mediums, but they can both tell narratives effectively. And what I like about comics is basically you get 2 chances to say the same thing. Like, for example, if you have a panel of someone looking at themselves in the mirror and they got like flop sweat all over their face, but then you have your voiceover panel that's saying, "I've never felt more confident." You can know right away that not only is this person super nervous for whatever they're going into, they're also like sort of deluding themselves. Whereas if you have that in a prose novel, you can also do that uncertainty, but it's not as immediate. I also think that like there's something to be said for how quickly you can read comics. Like just the ability to absorb all of these narratives, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment, which makes you want to read more. And then of course, prose has its upsides because prose you can really get lost in. I feel like for comics, I love them to death, but your comic has to be like at least 600 pages for me to sink into it the same way I sink into a prose novel, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, they're just different ways of telling a narrative, really.
Okay. Does anyone want to add to any of that before we go on?
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that whenever I encounter someone who's skeptical of comics, I bring up the fact that it's really just about storytelling. And when you're talking about a great novel, like the first thing you are talking about isn't like sentence structure and the arrangement of the paragraphs and typeface. You're talking about character, plot, themes, and those are all things that are in comics, but like you just have visuals. And then the other side of it is that people think, well, because there are the visuals, like then you're not leaving things to imagination. But as you said, like when you can have the visual be saying one thing and the text can be saying something else. So there's this thing that comics can do there that you can't do in other forms of storytelling.
And I think there's something about the speed that you were talking about that, at least for me, because I grew up reading comics, that enabled me to, I would read them more than once. I'd read them over and over and over again. And it was interesting that I did that because it was like, the first time was just sort of laying the groundwork, and the second time was like getting the themes, and the third time it was like procedural, and I felt like, you can do that. I feel like with prose, you often are doing that all at once, or sometimes if you have the patience to read a prose novel more than once, then you can do that too. But I was always a little bit of undiagnosed ADHD, and so I needed to, if I wanted to get the story into my head, I had to do it as fast as possible.
That's so true, and we want kids to reread things, to get things they might not have gotten the first time. And that those two levels, those panels, I noticed from my background as with picture books, that I feel like you can slow the camera down. Instead of just that 1-2-page spread that you get click, you get click, click, click. You can slow the camera down and go so much more in depth with the story. It's like way more sophisticated, I feel like. Okay, Dean. I've noticed since I first began teaching some years ago that kids nowadays seem very, like, almost culturally conditioned to just Google an answer or use AI rather than do the mental gymnastics necessary for evaluating all the information and coming to a conclusion or just solving any higher level problem. You mentioned speculative fiction can help develop cognitive flexibility. I wonder if you could elaborate on what you mean by that and also maybe define speculative fiction for anyone who might not have heard of that before.
Sure. Speculative fiction is, at least the way I think of it, is the broader umbrella under which science fiction, fantasy, horror, these kinds of, I think of them as the what if stories. It's fiction, but it's speculating. It's like saying, what if there were robots living in your basement? What if there were aliens that were at your school? What if, all of these different kinds of possibilities that are extensions of the real world. And I think, and I could be a little bit biased because I am a fan of speculative fiction and have always loved that kind of experience of confronting the what if. But I think the experience that especially kids can have as you're growing up of being confronted with something that requires you to do some gymnastics to make it work in the world, to be like, to answer questions, like if there are robots in my basement, how did they get there? You know, what kind of, you know, all of these just different kinds of questions that I think are healthy kinds of mental processes to go through in life.
A lot of reasoning skills,
Because
it sounds like.
things, especially as a kid, you're going to be hit with things that are new, that aren't part of your worldview, things that you don't understand. And how you confront things that you don't understand, I think, you know, is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Because the easiest thing to do is to be like, I'm not confronting it, or I'm saying this is evil, this is wrong because I don't understand it. But the process of being able to, you know, empathize or create a narrative that makes that make sense, I think is really healthy. Or you know, learning to live with not understanding, I think, is a really good skill too.
That's true, because kids generally want to make things, you know, this or that, and there's no gray area for it. Kennedy, I feel like this touches a little bit on something we've talked about before, so you can elaborate if you'd like. Publishers Weekly said evilish, and I'm quoting here, alchemizes aimless teen energy from half-hearted evilish deeds into purposeful community action, unquote. Do you feel there's anything about the plot of your story that is particularly relevant today?
Yeah. Well, let me step outside of my role as an artist illustrator for a second and just kind of talk about being a creative right now. And I think something I feel so in my day job, I work for Disney and we create animated movies, and then in graphic novels, we're all creating stories for all ages, and connecting with audiences in a way that feels meaningful is actually very hard. Like, I feel often, I've asked myself often, like, how does this create meaning in the way that, say, working in a co-op garden would create value? And it's like a puzzle that I think we all hit our heads on the wall about often. And I think the thing I tell myself when it comes to creating value and specificity is just humility, perhaps. Like trying to sort of get in the heads of your readers or your audience members. And in the case of Evilish, I was really trying to kind of talk about making mistakes in a way that is like reflective of my life, of like having to apologize for I don't know, I guess an analogy would be like being a jerk online. Hawthorne completely alienates the people around them. And I think often we can shy away from talking about these bigger issues because you kind of want to medium common denominator it. But in the case of Evilish, I was really trying to embarrass myself and embarrass Hawthorne as much as humanly possible, so that readers would feel like, okay, that's me. That's a little bit of me.
I feel like you totally nailed the age too, because I feel like he represented very well that teenage phase you go through where you're like, I have to get away from my parents.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It really, really hooks the reader.
Yeah. And actually, just to add to that, like, I think another thing for me is the feeling of like wanting to get away is very universal. It doesn't matter where you grew up.
Yeah.
But I think the older we get, it's like, it's not just getting away. It's wherever you go, there you are.
Okay. So is there anything, as we've been talking, that you guys have thought of that might be another benefit that we haven't spoken about graphic novels?
Well, one of the things about sequential art in general, I think that is always fascinated me, especially since I read it in, I can't remember, one of those books that analyze sequential art and talk about how important it is the work that happens in the gutters, in between, the gutters are the things that are in between each of the boxes, and the mental filling in that happens in between each of those. And it's different for every book, but there are some books that, that really lean on the ability of the reader to fill in the blanks, you know, to put in the connective frames between the two. And sometimes you can also leverage the sequential nature of it to subvert that expectation and do something opposite. And that's also, I think, cognitively flexible. You know, I think these are the kinds of things that I think you can learn of visual literacy through graphic novels more than you can in any other medium.
Yeah, it's interesting that people think, oh, there are pictures, and so that it's somehow not as much of a value, when I feel like you better be paying attention or you're going to miss something. You really have to pay close attention to, there's so much more going on. Anybody else? Jeffrey? Oh. No, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, no, I'm just, Mary, I have a question for you. I'm
Yeah,
curious,
what's up?
just like, so, and I guess this could go to everyone, but like, your day job, working with Snoopy or Peanuts, is like IP, and then this is an
Totally.
original graphic novel, and I'm curious, like, I just have been working in the original space in comics, but
Right.
I'm curious about how you transition into originals mode.
It's actually, I honestly kind of thrive doing it. I don't think it's like, it's almost mode switching. I don't want to call it code switching because that's something specific, but like
Yeah.
mode switching, you know? Like, I feel like at the studio, our task is to bring forward Sparky's legacy, Sparky being Charles Schultz. And so, you know, I've read Peanuts all the way through 3 times. So I have a pretty good idea of how he would approach humor, how he'd approach different topics, and how he would draw a lot of things. Like his hands, you know, I'm drawing little bloop, 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 bloop hands all the time. But that's not naturally how I draw hands, because my upbringing reading graphic novels was actually in manga. So you can see my style really doesn't look anything like Peanuts' style. And I think for me, it's almost like stretching before you work out, you know? Like I'm doing etudes on my violin or something before I'm gonna actually play the symphony piece. And yeah, so it's like warming up my drawing muscle with movements I've practiced a lot. And then I can, once the day's done, turn on my Pomodoro timer and start drawing in the style that's like, feels natural to me. And it's nice too, because since we're not supposed to put like any of our own like, I don't know, narrative juice into Peanuts, because we're just sticking to what Sparky wrote, I still have that juice left over to put into my comics. So, you know, I feel just very lucky to have a job that allows me to do that, you know. What about you? What is it like going from doing storyboards, is it?
Yeah. Storyboarding is weird because it's also writing, like at Disney specifically.
Yeah,
It's like you're like, right now we're coming up with a magic system. And so I view it also very much as warm-ups for my real work,
Totally,
which is
yeah.
this. Which is just at the end of the day, it's the interplay of writing and drawing and kind of trying to create a world. One is just with a bigger team, and then one is just me.
Working with a team actually energizes me to like go back to my own self too, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Because it's totally different creating a story with other people versus doing it alone, not least with like, you know, when you're drawing alone, you don't have to name all your layers.
Yeah. So true.
Okay, what about you, Jeffrey and Dean? Is there something about your either past experience in some other field or related field that either informs your work or gives you the freedom and space to be creative in it?
Yeah, Jeffrey, I was a big fan of your autobio comics, your indie comics, and I'd love to hear about interplay between that and X-Men.
Yeah, it's kind of weird for anyone who doesn't know. I started out writing adult autobiographical comics about basically failed relationships, and they were very personal with intimate details about, you know, like just, like I said before, the most awkward, embarrassing moments of my life. And I, like, part of that was I wanted to make art that connected with people, and I was in art school painting, and my paintings were not doing that, and so I kind of like went to this extreme. where it's like so personal and it connected like so deeply with readers, which was really rewarding. And then moving on to like when I got the chance to do Star Wars, and it's evolved since then. But yeah, it's just kind of taking that same kind of attitude of like I'm drawing from my own life and putting it into these other characters. So it's like in the X-Men book, there's like bits and pieces of the characters that are me, and sometimes it's like actual real life situations that I was in when I was a kid or whatever. But so I try to make like even when I'm drawing the X-Men, it's still grounded in like real life and my real experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why they're so enjoyable. Because I mean, I like 80s X-Men, but you know, it's nice to have like these superpowers in sort of like mundane situations, you know?
And we're going to talk more about X-Men in just a minute. Okay, Dean, anything about your other jobs that might inform what you do?
I was, my main other job is as a co-writer, so that does. It is different though. It's interesting when you've got a co-writer, especially one that is more established in the industry and also more established domestically in the home. We know who is in charge. There's a dynamic where there's always a safety net where I'm able to throw things out, and for better or worse, she's able to be like, not that, or yes that, or it's sort of like it short circuits writer's block, because I can just go and know that someone smart is going to be there at my back helping me out. Whereas when I'm on my own, although this book, whenever you're working for IP too, it feels a little bit like a co-writing job, because there's something that's already established. There are certain boundaries or structures. The characters exist. It's like taking your toys and playing with them, as opposed to just imagining something all on your own. You've got the toys, and the structure of them is already there. And so it's just a lot of fun. I mean, whenever I write something that's completely purely on my own, it feels more like the possibility for getting lost in existential dread is much greater than when I'm working with somebody or have got, it's just a lot of fun.
I love how you all have such different experiences that you bring to what you do. Jeffrey, back to X-Men. I'm wondering how you develop your own take on existing characters, specifically with your work for X-Men, a property that's continued to be popular, that's had the recent animated series.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I like working with superhero IP is that there's lots of different versions of the character. So I did a Batman book with DC, and I got to kind of come up with my own version of Batman. And with X-Men, I was kind of drawing mostly on the specific Chris Claremont early 1980s X-Men that I grew up with. But then, trying to like not update them necessarily, but kind of like just take my favorite parts of them and then mush it together with just like funny situations. And it's in a way, it's like one of the things I like about working with IP2 is that there's a lot of work that's already done for you in terms of creating character, and then you can just rely on the reader being familiar with that. So like the back cover comic of my X-Men book is Wolverine. He's walking into the room, he's all beat up and like looking like all tough, and he's like, "Stay out of my head, Prof. You too, Gene," because they're both mind readers, if you don't know. "You don't want to see what I'm thinking right now." I mean, he's a kid, but I guess that's his voice when he's like being tough. And then the last panel is like showing what's inside his head. It's like Wolverine's riding a unicorn in a field of flowers with a rainbow, and there's hearts like floating everywhere. And so I just like being able to like because people know this kind of essence of Wolverine, and then you can take that and like do something really funny with it.
Dean, I see you're nodding. The similar experience with
Yeah,
IP?
no, I just think that the whole idea, the subversion of expectations is just great. I mean, in terms of humor and in terms of just, being able to, catch somebody, and get them thinking. But just to leverage, that's something that we always try and do in our Princess and Black books, is try to get a scenario where you think you know what's going to happen and then flip it. It's just fun.
Okay, Mary. A creator's background influences the kind of work they create. I'm wondering what influenced your work, and this could be your personal upbringing, experiences, or the kinds of comics and stories you were exposed to growing up.
Yeah. Oh man, I've always been very omnivorous when it comes to comics. I will read any and all comics, but I think the very first comics I was reading was probably like The Far Side by Gary Larson. So good. Oh my God, I should draw more horizontal line eyes in my own work. But then around, I want to say 11 or 12, I started reading like the Pokemon manga, which sort of, streamlined me into reading manga, which this was like, I want to say the mid to late 90s. So manga was not as widely available as it was now. So yeah, and so I read so much manga. I read a lot of Rumiko Takahashi, Inuyasha. I read a lot of Naruto. I really enjoyed that. There was this magazine called Animerica, and they had a manga periodical called Animerica Extra, and I was reading like when Shonen Jump just came out in America. That was a big day. So I would say mostly my influences were manga to begin with, and then the first American comic I read like Watchmen and everything, but Big Two comics weren't a huge draw for me for a while, or like, I don't know, when you're a 12-year-old back then, it was like, oh, I only read manga, I only read comics from Japan. But thankfully, I grew out of that limitation, and I have largely credited that to Umberto Ramos's Crimson, which was an Image comic that came out, I want to say the late 90s. And from there, I was just like, basically, if it has pictures, I'll read it. And that's still how I approach it. And I think, I think obviously my style looks to me a lot like it's manga influenced. But by reading as many comics as I can, I'm trying to just pull influences from wherever I can, Because I don't want my style to look like, I don't want anybody to look at my style and know immediately who I'm influenced by, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just not what I'm going for, What about y'all?
Yeah, Kennedy, I was curious about the style of Evilish as well as the color palette that you chose for that story. What made you make those choices?
Yeah, that color was a doozy because I learned a lot on the go as I went. Like I always love, my personal work in color or other comics, but finally sitting down and being like, okay, 201 pages of gradient tool. It's funny actually. Gary Larson was like my biggest influence
Cow
too.
tools
Yes,
forever.
totally. But then I think it was the Witch series. There was a period of time in like the late 90s, early 2000s where the US started getting like English adaptations of a lot of French serialized comics, and those were a huge influence on me and still are. And then I also want to say manga, definitely. Naruto was huge for me. A lot of like shoujo, like Fruits Basket was
Magic
big.
Knights Rayearth.
Totally.
Oh, yeah.
But then at the same time, I think my comedic sensibilities definitely lean like I was a like religious Sunday comic reader, and I'd have to like go get my comic section. And so I think when it comes to my art style and also just being like raised on cartoons as well, I wanted something that can like there's definitely an anime influence, but also really trying to carve out my own humor where I can.
Okay, great, thank you. Jeffrey, I understand you teach comics. In case there are any aspiring artists out there today, what advice would you have for them?
I mean,
Unless they have to pay you for it.
no, I have a few main pieces of advice that I would give to anyone at any age. The first is, as Mary was saying, like read everything. like reading is learning. So like reading comics will help you learn how to make comics. And it's funny because I first started teaching. I teach college kids. I started teaching in 2010, and over the years, the classes have consistently gotten more and more sophisticated in the comics they're making. And I think it's because they've been able to read more and more great work. Whereas like when I was a kid, it's like I had X-Men, there was like Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had started, you know, and now they have such a wide variety of different work to read. So read everything. The second thing I would say is don't worry about the end product, which is actually like my class that I teach is all about getting the students to stop worrying about how the piece they're working on is going to end up being and focus on making the thing. And so forget about like finding a publisher or how it'll be printed. Just make your story. Just like focus on making the best comic you can make. And that other stuff will hopefully follow, but even if you make a great comic, it's not guaranteed that it's gonna find a publisher, or if it gets published, it's gonna find an audience and be successful. But your best chance is just focusing on the actual creative process. And then the last thing is just keep making the work. It's especially with comics, it is a grind. Drawing like if you have a 200-page graphic novel, the number of times you're drawing like one character is like, you know, thousands of times. And so it can be daunting. And aside from all the other things that stop people from being creative, whether it's feeling like you're not as good as someone else, or someone says something mean about it and discourages you, or you're just unhappy with how it's turning out. A lot of it is practice, and so just if you keep working at it, you'll get better and better, and maybe the thing you're working on now won't turn out great, but if you keep working on it, eventually you'll get to where you can make something you're happy with.
Spoken like a teacher. Okay, I actually have one more question for you, but before we get to that, I just want to make sure you all have a chance to work, to tell us if there's something, I mean, if it's under wraps, that's okay, but if there's an upcoming project that you're working on that you'd like to tell us about. I'm just doing more Penguin and Panda and some picture book manuscripts. What about you, Dean?
Always more Princess in Black. My wife and I are gonna be writing Princess in Black for as long as they let us, for as long as we can get, you know, an artist to do it. Leywin Pham, who is fantastic, has been doing the art on that. And this is a series, so there's another one coming.
Can you tell us the title yet? Or who's in it?
Yeah, I think I can say that it's Hulk.
Ooh,
Yeah.
speaking
That'll
of
be
Hulk.
Iron Man and Hulk, yeah.
Yeah. So the X-Men book is out. This Hulk book, Hulk Teach, comes out August 5th, and it's a middle grade graphic novel where because Hulk always breaks stuff, Bruce Banner has to do community service, so they make him teach middle school, which of course just makes him Hulk out because it's frustrating being a teacher, especially when you're like Bruce Banner, who's kind of a know-it-all. And I'm working on the second Hulk Teach book right now.
So, Evilish came out like 3 days ago, I want to say, so I'm still like absorbing that. But I'm illustrating Amy Brown's graphic novel. It's a middle grade through SNS called Earth Every Other Wednesday, and then I am writing my second book with the team at Feiwel. So.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm working on my second book right now. It's about 3 girls, or 3 teen girls who are having a friendship crisis at a Six Flags on their senior ditch day. And it is my excuse to draw lots of roller coasters. So for book 3, I can do a mecha comic.
Nice.
Awesome. You know, I struggled with whether or not to ask this question, but I figure there are people in the audience who would want to know what you're working on. But I kind of feel like those people who were at the Olympics when Simone Biles had just won all those gold medals, and they were like, "What's next for you?" And she's like, "Can you just give me a minute?" You know. Okay, so here's the fun question. Tell us something we don't know, just a little bit of trivia about your book. For example, my characters were not originally a penguin and a panda, they were a chimera and a kitty, and my editor was like, "You're going to terrify children," so I had to come up with other characters. So what about you, Dean? Can you think of any little tidbit for us? Behind the scenes thing?
Yeah, this isn't that interesting, but you know, one of the things I wanted to do in this book is have a giant. I love giant monsters, and I'm a big Cthulhu fan, and so I wanted to put in Marvel's Cthulhu, who is technically called Shumagorath, but that was actually created by I think Robert E. Howard for the Conan books, and so I couldn't do that. And so what I had to do was insert the character who was in the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which is essentially the same thing, but I just love the name Shumagorath, and I couldn't use it.
Yeah, I guess my thing is, so X-Men was like my favorite comic growing up, and it was like my dream to draw X-Men, and so when I first had the opportunity to work with Marvel, I was like, I want to do X-Men. And they're like, no, you can't do X-Men for whatever Disney reasons there were. And so the first Marvel book I did was Thor and Loki, Midgard Family Mayhem. And then, like, a few years later, like Marvel and Chronicle were talking, and they were like, do you want to do more Marvel? And it's like, yeah, but I don't know who I'd want to do besides X-Men. and then they're like, fine, okay, you can do X-Men this time. And so yeah, so it was actually like a 4 or 5 year wait from like the first conversations to being able to do the book.
Wow, that's a long time to wait, isn't it? Kennedy, you got a tidbit for us?
Yeah, so I hid my D&D group. They're in the background. I was very self-indulgent in my background extras, so they're there. Also a non-brand specific homage to Walter White and Jesse from Breaking Bad are there. What else? Again, a non-specific Maximus from Gladiator.
Nice.
Homage.
Okay, Mary.
For me, this is based after my hometown school and just my hometown in general. And my hometown has a ton of freight train crossings, so I grew up seeing this amazing graffiti on the side of freight trains. So for one spread, I wanted to have a huge freight train going across it, and in order to make sure the graffiti was right, I got in touch with my friend Vince Vert. He writes Crime Guys, which is an online comic about 2 graffiti writers in San Francisco. And I'm like, hey, do you have any buddies who like do train yards and stuff? And he's like, yeah, 1 second. And then he just sends me all these tags of his friends. And so I put like actual Bay Area tags onto those trains.
Nice.
I want to take a moment to thank you all for coming. Thank you again to the San Diego Central Library, to the Children's Book Council, and to the San Diego Comic-Con. We will be signing on the terrace after this. And that's all. Mitch, can I borrow you for a picture?
Thank you.